Picture this, you're one of the leading players of your club and national team in the prime of your career. You finished the football season having played numerous matches and won several trophies and individual awards. In the off-season, you travel with your national team to a major tournament which you brilliantly win. In the final, you get an injury and an award for the tournament's best player. This injury offers a much-needed respite, allowing you to recharge and enjoy a slightly extended vacation. During this break, you give a candid interview revealing that your body and mind are on the verge of exhaustion. You argue that football governing bodies and club executives should prioritize player welfare and health over their relentless pursuit of profit. The issue of a congested schedule has been a long-standing concern in the football community, with many influential figures voicing their opinions. However, you stand out for taking the most robust stance. Finally recovering from your injury, you deliver another memorable speech before your first match of the season, introducing the word strike for the first time. Many of your colleagues and even principled opponents will back this speech. Still, you'll also face criticism from those on the other side. Being one of the best players in the world right now, you, without hesitation, openly and so categorically speak out against the initiatives of the most influential people in the world of football, finding yourself at the epicenter of attention in an increasingly acute situation that could radically change the entire sport. And in a cruel twist of fate, just over a week later, you get a serious injury and are out for the rest of the season. This is the first such serious injury in Rodri's career. In 8 years of senior football, the Spaniard has missed only 5 official matches due to injuries. 2 weeks later, another Ballon d'Or contender, his national teammate Dani Carvajal, also suffered a serious injury. They both arrived at the national team camp on crutches to support their teammates at the start of the Nations League. You might say it's just a coincidence. Accidents happen. Football is a notoriously injury-prone sport. But what about the fact that exactly 50% of the Spanish national team's squad that won the Euro has already suffered various injuries this season, and some even more than once? Some have already recovered and returned, while others continue to be treated. These are only the cases that have been officially announced, indicating that the player is missing a particular match due to injury, and we're barely a quarter of the way through the season. Ironically, a few other top players who supported Rodri faced similar misfortune at the start of the English season. They all suffered injuries shortly after their remarks against the congested schedule. Ultimately, Rodri has only participated in 4 matches this season, even though, according to the schedule and all the new changes, it could have been one of the most record-breaking seasons of his career. Just take a look. 38 games in the Premier League, 6 matches each in the FA Cup and League Cup, where Manchester City should always aim for a spot in the final, and 15 matches in the Champions League. That's if City navigates the league phase without issue, or 2 additional matches if the team finishes outside the top 8. And I almost forgot that the FA Community Shield took place at the start of the season. Now let's move on to the end of the season, the revamped Club World Cup, which I detailed in my previous video. Instead of the previous 7 clubs, the new FIFA tournament will include 32 teams, competing in a classic group stage followed by playoffs. 64 matches instead of 8 in the previous format, and we all know exactly which tournament FIFA is challenging. There are still 7 matches to go before the final. Now let's focus on the national team. There are 5 international breaks planned for this season, with 2 matches played in each break, whether it's the Nations League, qualifying for the Copa America, or other key continental fixtures. In total, this amounts to 86 games. It's also important to note that before the season kicked off, City played 4 friendly matches. So that's the grand total, 90 possible matches in a season. Those numbers become even more daunting when we map them directly onto the calendar and try to find at least some necessary time for rest and recovery. This has always been a significant challenge for top English clubs, but now it seems nearly impossible. The Champions League reform doesn't just add 2 extra matches per year. It completely disrupts the familiar schedule and adds to an already intense part of the season. In the past, clubs could resolve their Champions League tasks by deciding December and then concentrate on the demanding December-January stretch during Boxing Day. But now, they have to deal with 2 additional matches in the league phase. It's quite likely that there will be 2 crucial games, where getting a result is essential to avoid having to play 2 more high-intensity and stressful playoff matches in February. The Club World Cup is also a real headache. It essentially extends the season by a whole month. Traditionally, an English top club would finish the league by the end of May and conclude the season with various cup finals in early June. Now, the team may be unable to take a vacation until mid-July, while the new season kicks off in early August. For instance, the Community Shield was held on July 30th this year. That's absolutely insane. How can players get ready for the new season? This isn't the same as in years when the World Cup or Euro took place, when national leagues in various countries could at least adjust the calendar to allow players a little extra rest. Moreover, adjustments can be made to conclude one tournament earlier and start the next championship later, all within the same summer. However, that approach doesn't apply to the Club World Cup because this tournament involves only a limited number of players, even if they come from the biggest clubs. Consequently, the organizers have far fewer reasons to shift the calendar. Besides, there's literally no room left for adjustments. Once all these figures are compiled and evaluated, Pep's comment about UEFA needing to extend the year to 400 days no longer seems like a joke. I understand there's squad rotation in any top club with a roster of at least 24 elite players. Still, even in such teams, there are truly indispensable players. They genuinely attempt to be replaced with very good alternatives, but nothing seems to work. And if those indispensable players are also not prone to injuries, well, that's just a dream scenario. But as you can see, you will still have to pay for this with your health. The largest international footballers union conducts an annual study on player workload, and the latest 2024 report's findings have led to a court case. FIFPro, together with several dozen national leagues, has filed a lawsuit against FIFA with the European Commission in Brussels over the reform of the Club World Cup. On the one hand, the union seems to recognize that this is a boundary that should not be crossed at any cost. But on the other hand, this football institution is also part of a more giant game and conflict, pursuing its own agenda, which we'll talk about shortly. At the same time, the union has raised concerns about the threat of potential player fatigue in almost every report over the past few years, even before these major UEFA and FIFA reforms. Despite this, FIFA President Gianni Infantino remains completely calm, calling the lawsuit a pointless debate and stressing that FIFA is within its rights to set competition rules by the current legal framework. After years of consistently publishing this research and working closely with many sports medicine experts, the union has settled on the number 55. Exactly 55 high-intensity matches per year at the top level mark the threshold where, for most footballers, the body enters a state of increased fatigue, struggling more with physical demands and injury resistance. For the latest report, data was collected from over 800 footballers in the 2023-24 season, and 17% of players exceeded this limit. On the surface, this may not seem particularly alarming, but let's face it, these 17% are the world's best players. They are the sport's main stars, selling tickets, broadcasts, and merchandise. Fatigue builds up in them, and their performance suffers. And eventually, when they've used up every last bit of energy, they end up in hospital beds. According to the advice of doctors and sports medicine professionals who regularly contribute to the union's research, a professional footballer competing in 55 matches a year at the highest level should be given a minimum of 6 weeks of proper rest, free from physical and mental stress. A complete body reset and immersion into a state of serenity is essential. But where are these 6 weeks supposed to come from, for instance, in the current crazy season? Where can they possibly be found? The next remotely decent summer break is only expected in the summer of 2027. Because if we're facing a new Club World Cup in the summer of 2025, the summer of 2026 will bring us a new World Cup featuring 48 national teams instead of 32. Furthermore, the workload on young players is incredibly alarming. By the age of 21, Jude Bellingham had already played 251 matches in adult football. At his age, David Beckham and Frank Lampard had played 54 and 93 matches. The closest comparison to Jude's statistics is Wayne Rooney, the main wunderkind of the 2000s, who played 212 matches. However, shortly after reaching 30, Rooney abruptly struggled to keep up his performance at the top level. One of the primary reasons for this decline is the nearly classic story of all football teenagers who begin to endure such high workloads at a very young age, placing stress on their still maturing bodies. According to FIFA Pro's estimates, if the current trends continue, Bellingham may play more than 1,200 matches in his career. Taking examples from other countries, Florian Wirtz had already logged 11,500 minutes in adult-level play by the age of 21. In comparison, Michael Ballack had only 4,175 minutes at the same age. Vinicius had played 369 matches by turning 24, while Ronaldinho had just 163. Another crucial point is the environment surrounding football players: training, recovery, routines, diets, travel, and preparation. Matches and competitions are just a tiny fraction of a professional athlete's life. They make up only 15% of their time, while half of a professional athlete's life is devoted to training and preparation. Moreover, top players participating in the Euro accumulated just 12% of their time off during the season. In other words, to put it in simpler terms for the average workers, these players didn't even get one full day off each week. When it comes to that critical mark of 55 matches, 17% of the players actually played in those matches, while 31% were part of the squad overall. This means that almost a third of the players in the study were involved in preparing, training, and traveling to these games by plane, train, or bus. Exhausting travel and flights, which consume 7% of their time, are also discussion topics. Last season, Julian Alvarez was named to the squad for official matches 83 times, playing in 75 games for both his club and the national team. This is a record among players in the top 5 leagues, but when it comes to total playing minutes, Alvarez didn't even make the top 10. To achieve these records as a key rotation player globally, he has to travel a lot and endure demanding journeys. By season's end, the forward had covered more than 150,000 kilometers and spent over 200 hours in the air, which is the second highest figure among footballers. Alvarez's teammate on the Argentina national team, Cristian Romero, covered nearly 163,000 kilometers. Other notable records from the 2023-24 season include Takumi Minamino, who recovered in just 24 hours after losing to Iran in the quarterfinals of the Asian Cup. The day after being eliminated, the Japanese player appeared on the field in a League One match for Monaco, having flown over 4,000 kilometers. Heung-min Son required 4 days of rest, while Chancel Mbemba needed 5 days after the Africa Cup of Nations. Alexander Lopez from Costa Rica has set the season record for the longest streak of consecutive matches, playing in 19 games in just 60 days. In fact, I could keep listing similar figures for another half hour. It's a 60-page document. However, what's more significant is the projection for the future. According to the study's authors, last season's playing time leaders, Phil Foden and Federico Valverde, are expected to approach the 80-match mark in the current season and surpass it in the next. Although it's impossible to separate these two seasons based on the calendar, they essentially blend into each other, creating one gigantic football season filled with countless tournaments for every taste. Well, if we consider all these comprehensive and authoritative studies, the medical community's opinions, experts, and dissatisfied participants in the process, a logical question comes to mind. Why do football authorities persist with this approach, defying common sense? Don't they realize that by pushing the workload of the top stars in this sport to critical levels, they are diminishing the quality of their own product? More weak teams are participating in tournaments, star players are increasingly spending time on the injured list, and clubs are compelled to make more and more transfers to keep up with this race, leading to excessively growing financial obligations and payrolls. Of course, everything boils down to greed. Regarding FIFA's motivation, we should once again look back at my previous video and remember that the primary governing body of football does not have a valuable and profitable asset like the Champions League, which allows UEFA to be entirely self-sufficient from national team tournaments that occur just once every 4 years. For FIFA, this is essentially their only source of revenue. Successfully carrying out this first tournament under the new format is a vital factor in reaching the goal stated by FIFA president Gianni Infantino to generate $11 billion in income during during the 2023 to 2026 cycle. It's quite astonishing that the organization stayed on the sidelines for so long and tolerated a situation where UEFA was reaping all the benefits and setting new profit records year after year. The idea of increasing the number of tournaments, teams, and matches is not particularly innovative. This approach has always been apparent when football authorities considered ways to enhance financial performance. The only questions are how to effectively present and implement these changes and whether now is the right time for them. In the case of the Champions League reform, it seems that UEFA anticipated a decade ago that a pandemic would sweep the world, causing clubs to lose a substantial part of their income and then face prolonged consequences. Their drive to recover from this crisis and make up for lost profits will likely facilitate a smoother transition to the new format of European competitions, where they are promised higher prize payouts. Additionally, Alexander Ceferin has a PR machine that works remarkably well. His team is far more competent than Infantino's, even though he wasn't directly involved in crafting all the significant reforms of recent years. His team ensured their smooth implementation into European football. In updating the Champions League, UEFA satisfied the top clubs and framed the reform as a true benefit for smaller teams. A truly brilliant effort, unlike that of their FIFA counterparts. Just look at how clumsily FIFA initially planned to reform the Club World Cup. Back in 2018, Infantino secured support from Asian and Arab companies, which according to Gianni were supposed to invest $25 billion in the tournament. Instead of figuring out how to promote this initiative and present it effectively to the football community, Infantino didn't even bother to clearly explain the details to his colleagues on the FIFA Council. Without providing any context, he simply told the council that he had guarantees for those $25 billion, but he couldn't even disclose the names of the giants who set a deadline for accepting the deal, stating that the offer would be withdrawn if it didn't happen. So we need to rush. And by the way, dear colleagues, be sure to sign non-disclosure agreements. This is not a joke. The FIFA president genuinely intended to push for the idea of a revamped tournament in this way. Ultimately, the council members voted against it and chose not to sign the non-disclosure agreements, which is how this story became public. The so-called generous sponsors were the Japanese conglomerate SoftBank and investment funds from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And after some time, it became clear that Infantino's goal setting hadn't really changed. One of the primary accusations against FIFA regarding the reform is that the organization failed to consult anyone before finalizing the new format. This was echoed by nearly all the heads of leagues, associations, and unions from various countries participating in the lawsuit as plaintiffs. It's interesting to note that they had previously expressed similar views about UEFA, but they did not engage in any legal proceedings at that time. In response, FIFA accuses the dissatisfied parties of hypocrisy and double standards, pointing out that while they depended on UEFA, they remained silent and accepted similar actions from the European organization. According to an official statement, the difference is that UEFA pursues its local, narrow interests. At the same time, FIFA truly stands guard over the global interests of football, investing its profits into its development and paying attention to the sport even in the most distant corners of the globe. The ongoing Cold War between FIFA and UEFA is, in essence, a spy thriller packed with clever moves, surprising twists, and mysterious figures influencing global football trends. I've already started working on this fascinating video, which will come out in November, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. We've already determined the clearly negative stance of most players, coaches, unions, and leagues on the issue. But what's the view from the business side? Top executives and club owners. PSG president Nasser Al-Khelaifi took the strongest stance, saying that players complaining about the packed schedule can simply choose not to play. Besides his position on UEFA's executive committee, he also leads beIN Media Group, a Qatari media giant and one of the largest sports broadcasters in the world, spending hundreds of millions annually on TV rights for UEFA and FIFA events. It would be quite unusual for someone like him to take the players' side. Bayern Munich's CEO John Christian Driesen shared a similar viewpoint. In recent years, Bayern has been firmly aligned with UEFA on most issues, whether it's the creation of the Super League or the ongoing debate over the financial troubles of Europe's elite clubs. But coming back to Rodri and the possible strike, how likely is such a turn of events? events. Everything indicates that it's unlikely. Despite the solidarity and unity in the football community, despite almost every player or coach from top clubs, and sometimes even mid-table teams, opposing the congested schedule, none of them have taken a truly hardline stance on the issue. In essence, Rodri's statement reminded the football authorities that the players are the industry's main heroes and that they need to be looked after and their opinions respected. But where's the concrete action? What's the next step? It's understandable. No one wants to risk their contracts or their future. Who knows what it could lead to in the end? Since only 17% of top club players may actually be interested in striking, it won't gain enough momentum. Those who start this rebellion could simply be crushed by the system, especially considering today's fierce competition, with others ready to replace them. We probably shouldn't forget about the FIFA Pro lawsuit, but first of all, this trial is quite a long and tedious event which will take months and maybe even years. Secondly, the participants in the process on the part of the union tell ESPN that all forces are thrown precisely to win in court. By the way, this isn't the first time FIFA Pro and FIFA have clashed in court. The most famous battle occurred in 1995, when the union won the groundbreaking Jean-Marc Bosman case, which completely transformed the transfer system in football. Back then, one of the lawyers representing the Belgian player was Jean-Louis Dupont, whose firm, Dupont Hissel, also represents FIFA Pro in this current case. However, we should approach this legal process cautiously, as the failed attempt to launch the Super League has united the European football community. FIFA Pro's position in this legal battle heavily depends on UEFA's support, which continues to escalate its confrontation with FIFA through others. This indicates that the specific interests of the players are not being prioritized. But on the other hand, even if these methods ultimately achieve the desired results, does it really matter? So what other options are there to resolve the situation? With Infantino's plan for achieving profitability during this cycle, FIFA is certainly not going to make any compromises. In England, for example, the FA Cup's format was changed due to the congested calendar. Imagine the FA Cup was reformed after 153 years. No more replays. If the match ends in a draw after 90 minutes, the teams go into extra time and then a penalty shootout. If the situation remains unchanged and the trend of congestion continues, the first option should be to look at squad rotation. This also raises many questions, especially regarding clubs and leagues that disrupt the market's fundamental principles, turning it into an endless arms race. For instance, if we refer back to Rodri, we can recall that in 2022, Manchester City signed England's midfielder Calvin Phillips for €50 million. He's a decent quality player who was expected to ease the Spaniards' workload by offering an alternative in midfield. However, after spending a year and a half on the bench, Phillips was loaned out first to West Ham and then to Ipswich. Following Rodri's injury, the club announced it wouldn't recall their player from loan early. While at City, Phillips faced weight issues and did not always meet Pep's training requirements. So, could the problem of effective squad rotation arise from selection failures or training problems? Another possible solution is selectivity. Clubs and players may start to approach various tournaments more selectively, realistically assessing their capabilities against their current condition. A recent example is the situation with Kylian Mbappe's call-up for the October international matches. Citing a minor muscle injury sustained at the end of September while playing for Real Madrid, the Frenchman informed Deschamps that he would not join the national team for the Nations League matches against Belgium and Israel, focusing on his recovery instead. However, just 2 days after the squad announcement, Mbappe played against Villarreal. The captain faced a torrent of criticism in France, but Deschamps diplomatically replied that the player's employer is the club, not the national team. I'm sure we will see more cases of these fabricated micro-injuries. The only question is how the football authorities will react. They can't put players on a lie detector to determine the truth. And the final, worst-case scenario is that the players will begin the much-needed strike, but in a way where everyone looks out for themselves. This would result in an unofficial strike, showing up in various forms, some players not running as much, others avoiding challenges, or simply not committing to tackles, all while remembering that they have an even busier schedule the following week with several matches that they just can't play on painkillers. 3 years ago, having quashed the Super League before it even launched and outlining future reforms, Ceferin called on top players to quit complaining, remarking that grievances are for factory workers, not for millionaire footballers. We are all used to thinking of football players as arrogant, spoiled, rich madcaps who don't respect anyone and oppose themselves to society. Much of this perception is shaped by stereotypes, but even so, aren't professional footballers still people like us? People with the right to decent working conditions and basic safety measures on the job, especially when they face dangers far more frequently than the average person, bearing intense physical loads that most people couldn't sustain even for a week. And backing the topic of factory workers, well, gentlemen, your decisions over the past few years have turned the entire football industry into one gigantic factory, churning out an endless conveyor belt of similar matches. There was a time when you genuinely live in anticipation of a big match, feeling that pleasant excitement about it. But now, with so many big games, you can't possibly keep up with everything. Yet football authorities keep telling us that this is normal and that it's actually for the best. And what about the players, who are not only being told this, but are also asked to keep quiet, stay silent, and keep running like hamsters on a wheel? Given that you insist on the idea of play less, earn less, why is it that you, Mr. Cheferin, made a quarter more in the 2020 than the year before? This was during the pandemic's peak, a season when games were cancelled, stadiums were closed, revenues fell, and the Euro was postponed. UEFA's income dropped by 20% that season, and Cheferin advocated for a pay cut for the organization's top executives. Yet for some reason, he overlooked himself and his inner circle. Just as I was wrapping up work on this video, Rodri won the Ballon d'Or. Should we now expect him to continue his fight against the congested schedule following this event? His previous injury episode generated widespread discussion and brought much more attention to the problem, and now the officially recognized best player in the world will continue to oppose the current system. Who better than him to finally break through this out-of-control and expanding bubble? The sooner it happens, the better. Folks, don't forget to check out my previous video on the related subject of the new Champions League format. Thank you for your time, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in November.